Great. Welcome back to Crash Labs. And today with me, a very special guest, Robert Kientz from goldandsilverpros.com. And so Robert, welcome to the show, and very, very pleased to have you on. And let's chat gold, silver. Let's chat markets. But first of all, let's chat about you. How did you get your start in this business?
Oh, that's interesting. So I have a 25-year history in tech and audit and things like that. I had a corporate career for a long time. I have a master's in cybersecurity. They call it information assurance, but everybody knows it as cybersecurity. So I was doing that, and that went up until a couple of years ago. But way back during the last crash, February 2009, I got laid off from Ernst & Young. I was working at Ernst & Young consultant audit, but a lot of what I did at Ernst & Young when I left, I was leading big business process redesign projects for the company. I was kind of the guy that would call in if a company called Ernst & Young and said, I'm having issues, I need people right now to solve this problem. I was one of the guys that went and solved the problem. So I was doing a project for Morgan Stanley. They had bought Novastar. Novastar had 52,000 loan portfolio, and during that time, of course, we know the real estate market was blowing up. So Novastar went defunct, but they had to have somebody service it. Morgan Stanley bought that portfolio, and we took about 50 people and went through and cleaned it up. So I got to see the mortgage sector from the inside, and I got to see how screwed up it was, and then I work as an auditor for the U.S.'s leading subprime servicer, which was called OMSI, or American Home Mortgage Servicing. Now, I think they were bought out by Ocwen a few years later. But so I worked for them for a couple of years, and I saw everything going on in the mortgage sector, and I thought, oh, this is a mess, and I got to tell a story. So I wrote a book, because why wouldn't you write a book, right? I've never written anything. I've never done any social media. I'm going to write a book. Wonderful idea. So I wrote it and self-published it. Couldn't find a publisher, of course, because nobody knew who I was. But I self-published it and managed to get myself writing for like Seeking Alpha. And back in the day when Seeking Alpha first started, they're doing a lot of syndication. So I got on Yahoo Finance and MarketWatch and NASDAQ.com, and I started getting a lot of writing gigs. And I did that for a long time while I was working full-time back in the industry. And then at some point I decided to just run my own business. So I have a social media business, and I run a retail store, which you see behind me is my retail gold and silver store in Grapevine, Texas, and that's sort of what I do. And I do a lot of promotion for the equity space for mining stocks. So anything end-to-end within the gold and silver space, I sort of am involved with in some way.
So was it the fear of what you observed in that whole, I guess, deep dive, or that peek behind the curtain, we'll say, on the subprime side, and just understanding the inner, how do we say that, the rot, I guess, in that sort of market, that piqued your interest on gold and silver and sort of a return back to this fungible trade or investment, I guess?
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with the mortgage market, but also as an auditor. So what I like to say is I knew where all the dead bodies were buried for every company I ever worked for. And I worked internal audit for certain companies, but I also worked in consulting, KPMG and EY, for a long time. And I saw a lot of the stuff going on across American business. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that what we're told is not really the truth in many cases. For example, I'll give you an example. I was working for Blockbuster Video as an internal control person, and I found a material weakness. Material weakness is Sarbanes-Oxley legislation around financial reporting. So all public companies have to financially report. They have to have internal and external auditors. So I found what I thought was a material weakness. You don't want a material weakness, obviously, and I reported it to management. And they weren't too happy with the fact that I found it. They're the one that gave me the work. I just reported what I found. That's what they were paying me to do. They didn't really want me to report that, and they kept trying to force me out. And eventually I did leave the company. But after my director and my manager quit for basically the same reason. So I was the last one. So I stayed and I fought the good fight. And after a while, I was like, okay, I'm out. Okay, about 4 or 5 months later, Blockbuster announced another material weakness that the external auditor reported. And so then it was on, we knew Blockbuster eventually went bankrupt. And there was, I won't tell the whole story of Blockbuster, but what I saw there was basically a lot of what I consider to be fraud. And I'm not accusing the company of that, but in my opinion, I felt like it was fraudulent. And that opened my eyes. The mortgage mess opened my eyes. And so I started saying, what is this economy? Because when I went to business school, I have a bachelor's in business. When I went to business school, it was Keynesian economics. It was Nash. It was game theory, that was economics, but in finance, and I took accounting and all that. And I'm like, this is not what we were told. And so I felt like I saw a different world. You know, I was Alice in Wonderland, everything was upside down. I was like, wait a minute. So writing for me was a catharsis, and it was a way for me to study. At the same time, I was able to share that with other people and become a part of that community. And I think that's really what kind of propelled me there. And I was pretty mad at the time in February when I got laid off, because we just had my son, and we had bought a new house, and I'm like, how do I pay for this? Because I'd done everything right. I'd gone to school, I'd been a straight A student, I graduated cum laude. Eventually, my master's, graduated 3.95 GPA, I was first in my class. So I'd always done all the things I was supposed to have done. And I had also made Ernst & Young $7 million on that said engagement with Morgan Stanley. And not only did I bill for Ernst & Young $7 million, we saved Morgan Stanley $7 million, because they were allocated $15 million to clean it up. We did it for half. So I made a lot of people a lot of money. And I got laid off, and I'm going, wait a minute, that's not the deal. I did you guys a good. Why are you letting me go? You know, why wouldn't you keep me? And it made me mad. And so I went and studied the economy, and I figured out this is all a big fugazi. It's a mess. And what you're told is not the truth. And so a lot of what I do is educate people on what the truth is. And it's, you know, I wrote in my book, chapter 2 is 50 pages on government statistics and how basically it's a big mess. And anyway, so I carry that education forward. But that's really kind of what woke me up. I was in the middle of the Great Recession, seeing stuff that, you know, and had a background as an auditor that saw stuff leading up to that, which led me to believe, wait a minute, this is, you know, the story we're told is not necessarily the real story.
Now, I mean, I have so many questions about that, but I guess on the face of it, you mentioned the term recession, and isn't it funny that the media and the sort of public-facing narrative is that we're still toying with one? It's not quite a recession yet. It's this, that, the other thing. Like, they're so reluctant to say it, right? Whereas the rest of us that are on the inside of this are going, this has been a recession for a long time.
I think it's been a non-technical recession. I'll make the differentiation between nominal and real. Nominal is what you have when you don't discount anything for inflation and you look at things just top line numbers. And one of the things I prove in my book is you can't do that, because the government has screwed with the numbers so much. And I'm just speaking U.S. here. I'm sure it's probably true everywhere else, but let's just talk about the U.S. So the government has screwed with the numbers so much you can't depend on them. And when you try to compare 1980s unemployment to employment today, you realize it's different. And anyway, the government screws around with the numbers. And so I think we've been in a recession for a long time. I think it's very clear. And I think the average person knows that. I mean, I have people come into my store and they're selling me their gold chains and necklaces. I had this young lady come in, she's 18 years old, and she's like, I'm trying to go to nursing school. My parents can't afford it. I can't afford it. I'm selling my necklace. She brought me a necklace which had about $50 in gold in it. I gave her $200. And I didn't tell her I was giving her $200 because I wanted her to have the money. I just gave her the money because I felt so bad that here is this 18-year-old blessed child that's trying to go to nursing school and be a good part of the community.
And this is all she's got.
And that's all she's got. And I can't pay for her college, but I can help her out, you know. It's the plight of people right now. When you're on the ground like this and you see people selling off their prized jewelry that their husband gave them, when you see people selling off the plateware, the silverware sets and the extravagant things they've had in their family for 200 years, which are family heirlooms, when you see that, you know it's not good on the ground. But you don't get that acknowledgement for government. So there's a separation between what the government says and what I see every day. And so to me, I think we've been in a recession. The government doesn't want to call it. Obviously, it's not politically expedient to do it, especially with a presidential election this year. They're probably not going to want to do it. But, I mean, that's the truth. We're in a recession.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I made an observation, I guess, a few years ago. So sort of post 2008 and all that. Remember when The Big Short came out, the book, both the book and the movie? I guess I only watched the movie. I'm like one of those, you know, did you read the book? No, I definitely just watched the movie. But it was good for me because I'm not a financial person. Like I learned my financial dictionary on the job, you know, at Pine Tree Capital, evaluating deals, and all of this capital markets, this big money stuff sort of was learned on the job. And it was later in life. so I can't claim to be an expert there. But I did make a few very practical observations, I thought, at the time, which one of them was, I remember this when Barack Obama sort of took over, and the Fed with Yellen, et cetera, they were, clamoring about, we just had gone through a lot of QE, right? All the quantitative easing, and then gold had gone insane. And then they were talking about, how the economy was strengthening and how jobs were coming back. And the first thing, and to your point with the jobs, is I was looking and it was like part-time jobs. There was a lot of like part-time jobs, but they were just calling them jobs. They're like, oh yeah, there's more jobs. It's like, are they more McDonald's jobs or are they factory jobs? And then if I go back to my hometown, there used to be like 8 factories when I was a kid. There's one now, like everything has been gutted. And so I know there's not really good jobs. And then if you go back to like picking up my nieces and nephews at the school, and a lot of these people that are there are young people that I went to school with, and grew up with, and I can see them come in and they're looking run down, their teeth are brown, and they're having a hard time. Drugs is alcohol, that's a lot going on, and it's just sad to see. But that's a real observation. I mean, it's one town, but then if I had the benefit of moving around quite a bit, in my field and seeing a lot of towns. And so, yeah, things weren't better. And we're being told that they were. We're being told everything was putting itself back. We're putting ourselves back together, but we're not. And then when I learned about all this subprime stuff, like I think the movie does a pretty good job explaining it. And, learning about all of that, and all of a sudden seeing all the automakers who we bail out, there's suddenly 0% down, 0% for X number of years, 3 years, come and get your brand new Hyundai Elantra, whatever it is, right? And every single dealership, it's bombarding us on the radio, 0% down, 0% whatever. And everybody, I looked around, I didn't see any K cars, I didn't see any pieces of shit. I saw everybody's driving a new car. And how are they paying for this stuff? So the House of Cards thing, it's transformed. It doesn't seem to have gotten better. It just seems like everybody got the blinders put on them. And can you trick a market into believing everything's okay and then things work? And then for how long does that last?
Well, that's what they're trying to do. But if you look through history, one of the things that I try to do is not just look at what's here or the last 10 or 20 years. I look way back. So, I mean, you have contractive and contractive cycle theory, which is 80-year. I think Neil Howe may have popularized that with his book on, the 4 seasons. But originally that was contractive back in like 1919. Was commissioned by like the royal Russian family to study economic cycles. And he came out and said there's an 80-year cycle. And it's 4 people generations. And you have a winter, a spring, a summer, and a fall. And if you take 3 of those and put them together, you have the nation-state cycle, because the average nation-state, dominant nation-state, like the U.S. or Great Britain in its heyday, or Spain or Rome or any of those, lasts about 240, 260 years. Rome was broken in 2 because you had the Republic and then the Emperor. So that's really 2 epics. And there was also 2 versions, the East and the West. But each one lasts about 250 years. This is done by Sir John Glubb. Sir John Glubb, much like you, moving around, he was in charge of like Middle Eastern armies. He was in charge of the parts of the British Army. He was an officer for much of his life, and then he traveled around doing speaking engagements. And he's like, I'm noticing the same things over here that I'm noticing in my own country, and it kind of shocked him. He's like, wait a minute, we're different culture, we're different areas, different money. How is this all? And then he studied it all the way back to the ancient Assyrians. So he covered almost 2,800 years of history in his study. And he figured out there are mileposts for every nation state, and they're almost the same, and they occur at almost the same time. And it doesn't matter if it's 3,000 years ago or if it's 2024. It's the same. And so it's the pattern analysis. And so I do a lot of pattern analysis, and I have a gentleman that's coming on our YouTube channel on Thursday that does Elliott wave analysis, and he said it's based on fractals of math. And my own study of fractals of math have led me to believe that humans are very pattern-based, and that using math you can kind of model it. Anyway, long story short, I studied long-term, and what you figure out is we played this game before. We played this game in Britain, and we played this game in Spain, and we played it in Rome, and we played it in Assyria, and we played it everywhere. And it's basically when you get to the end, this credit boom, the fake money, which is where we are, the government and other interested parties will do whatever they can to make everybody seem like it's normal. And you have this euphoria. And we have officially entered the euphoria stage. I mean, when you have GameStop driven up to whatever, now there's a famous movie on Netflix about it. You have GameStop driven up even though the company's basically broke. These are signs that you're in the euphoria stage. People don't want to believe that the punch bowl will be taken away. They don't want to believe we'll ever get into a recession. And see, 2008 to 2009, what that taught me was there's no rationality in the system because we didn't fix it. We kicked the can down the road.
Totally. That was my observation too, is that in 2008, 2009, it was like a complete just kick it down.
Kick it down the road. The amount of debt we've created basically has cemented the fact that we can't get out of it in the United States. Kenneth Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart wrote about this. A famous one was from Harvard, I think one from Yale, and they wrote this book back in 2009 where they analyzed this. And once you get past 90% of debt to GDP, you can't recover. A crash has got to happen. We got up to like 140. I think now we're down to like 120 or something. But the United States has passed the point of no return. So we're in trouble, and we're going to basically have, well, you either have a default or you have to print your way out, and everybody's always chosen to print their way out. Nobody wants to ever default. They do. It's a soft default, but then they try to print their way out. Now, I think that's where we're going, and I don't think we're that far from it. But I think the euphoria that we've had the last 12 to 15 years has been based on a bunch of money printing. But now it takes something like $2 of money printing to get $1 of GDP. So now you're like the snake eating its tail because you're spending money but getting less back. It's like it's like running a business and you're spending $100 a day but you're only getting $50 back. You're going to go out of business, right? So that the U.S. economy is going to go out of business here before too long. And it's just a matter of time, and it's just we're sitting in this cycle where nobody wants to admit it. It's euphoria. And what will happen is the young generation, Gen Z, are going to be the ones. They're going to be the quote-unquote hero generation. They're going to be the most maligned generation along with the millennials. They're stupid. They don't know anything. They're the problem. But when the crash happens, they're going to be the ones that dig us out of it. That's what history teaches us. And I think that they'll end up being building the new modern economy. And I think those generations will have a lot to do with it. But that's what we're going through. We're going through a change of cultural, political, economic systems. But in the United States, it's the end of our dominant nation state. People are getting out of the dollar. They're de-dollarizing. Our culture, nobody respects us anymore, really. I mean, look at our political leaders. Right now, we're talking about impeaching our president because he doesn't seem to have cognitive function. This is in the news. I'm not one side taking sides, but this is in the news. All this kind of stuff is happening. We have a quote-unquote border invasion. I live in Texas. And we've called special sessions in Texas to deal. We only have legislative sessions in Texas every 2 years. So this year in 2024, we're not supposed to have it. They've got special legislation going on trying to deal with the border crisis. And the border crisis is so many people are coming in, by the way, which is also a hallmark of a nation state that's on its last legs, according to John Glove, because if you look at Assyria, if you look at Rome, if you look at Spain, if you look at Britain, if you look at every single one of those nation states, the exact same thing happened. You had the economic default. You had a rush of people in because they see the euphoria, so they're going to go to America for the golden dream.
It looks good. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're seeing it in Canada too. Yeah.
Yeah, you're seeing it everywhere.
Mass migration.
Yeah. And what's happened is we've exported all of our inflation, and all these smaller economies have been destroyed. Look at Argentina. Look at Zimbabwe, look at Turkey with all their currency problems. And now all those people are coming here thinking, oh, we better go over here. They're doing better, but all they're doing is going to the land of the most risk. Why? Because we're the world reserve currency. When it busts here, it's going to bust bigger than anywhere else. That's also what history teaches us. So that's where we sort of are. So actually, the immigration problems are going to solve themselves because when the dollar busts, everybody's going to leave. You're going to hear a great sucking sound outside the United States. People are like, I'm going back to Chile.
To somewhere else where they're actually doing okay. Yeah. Well, it's funny because there's a bunch there to unpack. So one of them, so you're mentioning these markers. It was funny enough. I was looking at in I guess ancient Rome, and there was at that collapse. I think I forget who it was, some Caesar or somebody in charge, right? Tried to put through some tablet that was or some policy that was price fixing everything. So everything had an exact, like, a pound of grain, a pound of meat, a pound of purple thread or whatever it was. Everything had an exact price, and that was to be decreed across the entire empire. No one was to charge more than that. And that was, in response to inflation, which is what we're seeing. And a couple other things, though, about that. So it's interesting because when you map out the cyclicity in some of these things and you go that far back, I mean, one, you're dealing with very coarse data, so it's awfully difficult to unpick that. Number two, there's other quantums that change with time. One being, I think we may see transitory periods between, let's say, China's rising and the decline of the U.S. Can that be accelerated? Can that sort of intermediary period be shortened? Now, are we going to expect the same periodicity as we've seen in past empires on their collapse and the rising of the next one? Sometimes those periods are marked with like 30 to 50-year overlap periods.
I think we're in that overlap. Yeah, we're in that overlap now, and it can be if the politicos would say, okay, let's take the pain now. But the politicos never want to take the pain, because how do people get elected? They have money from special interests that elect them. They have people that are voting for them. They have to kowtow and manage that. And what they basically do is these special interests pay for their campaign, and they try to sell to the people the special interest programs and make it seem like it's benefiting the people. But then the people eventually wise up, and I think that's what you're seeing in the Western world, not just the United States, but all over the Western world. It's why you have riots all over Europe. Where was it? The farmers in France got the policies overturned. In Germany, got the EU policies overturned to get rid of emissions and all that kind of stuff. You know what they did? They took their hoses and they sprayed cow manure all over government buildings. Okay, why did they do that? Because they're like, you're killing our businesses and we don't like it, and since you're not listening to us, we're going to spray your building. So the ability of the politicos to influence the people into some of these things that could be that are self-destructive to the nation state is ending. That's a hallmark. But the politicos always want to hold on to power. They never try to give it up. It's human nature. We know that they're going to fight to the end. Look at what happened last night in the United States. Late night, nobody's awake outside the news cycle. We approved funding for more wars. Didn't get anything for the border, didn't get anything domestically. Why would we want to do that when we can spend money and fund other people's wars over here while our nation states in the collapsing? By the way, that's also a marker of mature nation states. You're focusing on the outside rather than the inside, and the collapse is always inside.
Do you think civil war is possible?
It's possible. It wasn't the barbarians that killed Rome, it was Rome that killed Rome.
I know historically, but do you think today, in our modern times, with people being better educated en masse today than ever before, arguably, I'd like to think our quality of life is high enough in the West, at least, et cetera, that we may be insulated from like an all-out civil war, like we've seen in Spain, like we've seen in France, like we've seen in other places.
Well, that's a tough one, because the Civil War would be different. It's not like we're aligned geographically. We're more aligned ideologically. So the Civil War would be weird, because you would have people squaring off in the same cities against each other theoretically if that were to happen. And what's also different is the internet. You mentioned, access to information. The internet is much like the Renaissance, what eventually led to the French Revolution, was the printing press. The printing press, a bunch of books get printed. Let's teach you the real history. And people started to learn to read. And they're like, wait a minute, it's not what our royals told us. Isn't not exactly. So they figured things out. And I think the internet is the second version of that, but it's actually much faster. I think the revolutions that occurred because of the printing press took hundreds of years. The internet's really been going for 30 to 40. So yes, the timelines have shrunk for sure. And people's ability to almost instantaneously interact on social media, to instantaneously send information across one of these, and across the entire world. So, anytime a country tries to prevent people, I laugh every time a government says, well, we really need to lock down that internet because, we don't like all the voices coming up. You can't in today's society. How are you going to do that? Because if you do, you shut down business. If you shut down the internet, you shut down business. They can't. and they can try to legislate speech. But the problem is when you have this and you have encryption, it ain't going to work. So things are going faster. And yes, I do think we have the ability to prevent civil war, but it depends on these types of things. This podcast, YouTube, social media, all of us getting involved in having these conversations is what's going to stop a civil war. Because at the end of the day, civil war doesn't benefit us, the people. It benefits special interests. So we don't want to go there. And I think that we have the opportunity to prevent something like that, but it's up to us. We need to take control. It's we the people, and we the people need to take control and say, we're captaining this ship. You guys had your chance. You screwed it up. Let's go back to rule by the people, representative, I would say republic, not even democracy, because democracy is mob rule, technically, but representative republic, and go back to more local and state, and focus on our local communities and get out of trying to police the world and get out of trying to print $1 bazillion for anything that you want to, and take the focus on that level. If the focus stays on the national level, you could have a civil war. I mean, look at what happened to the insurrection, I use in quotes, on January 6th. How has that divided the nation? When that one event has divided the nation. Well, why? Why do we allow it to do that? I love my neighbors. I love the people down the street. I don't want to fight with them. So it comes down to, are we going to stay focused locally? Are we going to support our local businesses, our local schools, our local political systems? Or are we going to turn around, pull out our guns, and fight each other? And I'm hoping that, cooler heads prevail and people, don't break out the guns and start fighting each other. But it's up to the people, and it's up to the internet, and it's up to information, and it's up to us talking about this. So education, by far, the number one thing that we need to do to prevent something like that from occurring.
I think you're right. I've long dwelled on the political, the system, and is it broken, and how do you fix it? And I landed on the same thing, that we need to uplift our focus and put our focus on municipal politics. Politics that should matter to us most should be municipal and then state. It shouldn't be a federal. The federal side should be less of a thing. It's funny though that in the last sort of 50 years, I would say, I don't think anybody really cares anything about their municipal politics. They don't really even pay attention to what's going on there, and that should matter most to you. That should matter most to you in your life. And I think if we could start to unify that way and get together and take ownership for our municipalities and participate at that level, I think we'd be far better off in the long run. So I completely agree there. I guess one of the interesting things too that I wouldn't mind diving in with you is so we've got ancient Rome, we've got sort of this sort of long drawn out cyclicity, the rise and fall of powers and all of that being mapped out, and we can feel it. I mean, this airplane is being held together with 90-mile-an-hour tape and chewing gum, it seems, and it's only a matter of time. What do you think that last pin drop is? What do you think that the straw that breaks this camel's back is?
The finances there. I mean, the banks are already starting to crater again. We have New York Community Bank. Last week I posted their shares had dropped 60% in a few days, because for the same reason we saw the bank failures last spring. Let's talk Credit Suisse, which got bailed out by UBS, and now UBS is in serious trouble. That just came out. They're losing money right and left. Here in the United States, you had First Republic, Silvergate, SVB were the big ones, and a bunch of small ones. And oh, by the way, since the beginning of 2023, we've had more bank failures than at any point in American history. Any other year in American history, 2023, there were more. And that's with the BTFP, the Bank Term Funding Program that the government put out basically that said, hey, U.S. banks, you got bad debt, we'll loan you money on it, just let us hold it. Well, that's ending in March 11th, and they have another year to pay it off, but they're pulling the punch bowl away. So anyway, the economics of it are set in stone. The math of it, if you look at it, the math of it, you can't work it out.
What do you think the straw that breaks the camel's back is? Where a lot of these things should be signals, and I think a lot of us expected those signals to have greater impact on, say, gold price or silver price. It just doesn't seem like it is. It seems like there's still some sort of disconnect. So I'll use the term gold bugs. And so the gold bugs, the broken clock's right, is always going to be right at some point, right? So, or whatever they say, the broken clock's right twice a day. Sometimes I feel a little that way with this whole gold trade and silver trade. And I mean, we're highly levered to mining and commodities because we believe we're poised for a boom. And for all intents and purposes, it seems like all of these things that we're seeing, these forces and this whole waning government, waning centralized banking, et cetera, should have some positive impact on gold and silver as people return to fungible value to protect their wealth. I guess I just don't know when that, like, what is it we're looking for? If you would have told me a few years ago that banks would have collapsed in 2023 more than ever, I would have said, well, then you'd probably be looking at like $4,000 gold at that point or something crazy. Like gold would have exploded, but it didn't.
There's a great quote I can use to answer that question, because you can't look at the situation linearly, because humans aren't linear. It's not the way it works. And if you look at the math in fractals, it's not linear either. It's exponential. So essentially what you've got, you have people that are trying to figure out when an event's going to happen using straight lines, and it doesn't work. So there's a great quote by Arthur Schopenhauer. He says, all truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, is accepted as being self-evident. Well, the truth didn't change. People changed. What he's saying in that quote is the truth was always there. It's how people perceive and accept that truth. And it goes back to what you asked me earlier. You asked me, how long can this go in transition periods? Well, I don't know, because there's 8 billion people on the planet. And you have to understand the collective psychology of 8 billion people to answer that question. It's not the fact that we printed too much money. We've already printed too much money. There's trillions of it. And according to FASB 56 in the United States, the government can lie to you about how much has been printed. And if you look at Catherine Austin Fitz's analysis and the doctor at Michigan State University and his PhD students that went and looked at the military, they found 100 trillion of missing money spent by the military. And then when they called it out, they passed FASB 56, which says, yeah, there's 100 trillion, but we're not going to let you know how much we're going to print now, because now we can lie to you, and that's enshrined in American law. We're going to lie to you. The numbers are already there. The math is there. It's how people accept it. And what Arthur Schopenhauer figured out was all of these systems are a faith-based system. And when people lose faith, then it goes boom.
So it's a faith thing.
Yeah, you look at what happened in Germany. That was a fugazi. How long did that go on before the hyperinflation? Why was it a hyperinflation? If you look at the great Austrian economists like Mises, Hayek, Hazlitt, those guys, they wrote that it's a confidence event. The math has already occurred. The system's broken. But people will continue to use that.
Yeah, we're all pointing to those signs.
Yeah, we're still using the system even though it's bankrupting us. Look at how many businesses are going under. Look at how many ways we have to prop up the system. It's already broken. But it's when people finally walk away from it and say, I can't live in this anymore. It's the breaking point. Are we at the breaking point? You're getting closer. All the signs are there. People are living on credit. We saw that. Buy now, pay later programs. People aren't paying their credit card bills. The most credit card defaults in history, most auto defaults in history, most mortgage defaults in history. When that news hits people, and it will in this very fast internet age, people are going to say, oh, boom, go to gold and silver, boom, that fiat system's dead. It's over. It's toast. Now, it's funny that you also cannot, there are a bunch of things you can't look at. You cannot look at gold and silver physical flows necessarily, because it's a waterfall. Because when the public gets involved, you're not just moving 100 tons of gold a day, you're moving 1,000 and 10,000. I mean, as much as ever has been produced is going to be demanded. You have 8 billion people. And when they can't afford gold and gold goes to whatever it's going to go to, they're going to go to silver. And when silver goes to whatever it's going to go to, they're going to go to whatever they can.
Yeah, anything tangible, anything fungible.
They're going to have chickens and trade eggs for barter. Seriously. I'm serious. This happened during the Great Depression. Both my parents grew up during the Great Depression. My father was in the 7th Naval Battalion and landed on D-Day. Okay, and we're a German family, and he was trying to get rid of Hitler because we didn't believe Hitler represented, Germany, the Germany that my great-great-great-grandparents came from when they immigrated to the U.S. So, but all of that stuff happens very quickly. And it's that, what is the denouement? what is the flip of that? I don't know. It's usually when people say, we've had enough, we're fed up and we're tired of it, and you can see that in society. So it's economic, culture, and political all at the same time, but it's up here. It's the collective mindset of the people that says we've had enough. Well, look at what happened in France and Belgium and Spain and Germany. The farmers are protesting. Well, they've woken up. Why? Because they're on the ground trying to make food for people. They see it. What happened to me in 2009? I saw it because I worked in an industry in which I said, this is not the truth. And as more people get closer to the truth, I was lucky to be there. If I hadn't gone through that experience, it would take me years to figure out what's going on. I was right place, right time.
Well, look at in Canada, I think it's landing. It's happening quickly with people because we're having a food bank. Like Canada's had exponential visits to food banks. I mean, we're like a third of the country now visiting food banks a month, and it's absolutely appalling. And we still have this carbon tax thing, which has effectively just been ratcheting up and then distributing. Everybody's getting a check now for groceries, a check now for carbon. They're getting a check, and all these free checks are coming in. It's just sort of distribution of dough. And, you know, in the metropolitan centers where a lot of people use bus passes and walk and things, and they're getting checks for these things, and that's great. Granted, a lot of their expenses are higher, rent, et cetera. But I think people are starting to realize it, and they're starting to reject notions like carbon taxing and stuff like that here, because they're starting to realize that on their food bills, they can see their groceries are way more expensive because, you know, you need tractors and farms and truckers and grocery stores and stuff to ship all this stuff around and store it, and, you know, carbon. So they're not going to brunt that cost. They're going to put it onto the products, and you're going to pay for more on the products. And so now people are seeing, you know, their food bill going up a sickening amount, and they're starting to understand what that actually means. And so the government's doing as good as they can to kind of massage that out. I guess one of my concerns, and you mentioned this earlier, and I think it's sort of fitting to talk about this in a couple of ways. You mentioned that the younger generation is super important. I think both of us are trying to get to that generation. So my first question to you, I guess, is how do you find your messaging is landing on younger ears, or is your audience still older?
So let me answer that question real quick, but I want to go back to the previous one and make one real quick super point. In terms of gold price, people look at gold and silver as bellwether of what's going on. It can't be, because they're run by the derivative markets, and that's a paper market, and that market runs on 3-month cycles. And that never reflects reality until reality hits those traders smack in the face, because they're not there for the physical market. They're there to make a few pennies on a contract that they control with 3% of value, massive amounts of gold or silver, which are actually just paper against paper. And the vast majority of the spot pricing is not done from the miners who are hedging their physical, or the manufacturers who are hedging the potential price increase in the physical, opposite sides of the hedge. That's 10% of the market. The other 90% is a big fugazi. It's a gambling casino. You never get accurate gold and silver pricing until you get to a physical market. If you look at Shanghai Gold Exchange, there's more physical delivered on that market than any other major market in the world that I can tell. I think 77% of the contracts are delivered in gold, and something like almost 20% in silver. Drop in the bucket to the Western markets, but those prices are higher right now.
And physical premiums are huge.
Yeah, the December contract for Shanghai is $90 above the equivalent contract in COMEX for this coming December, and I think that's even low. Anyway, long story short, you can't look at spot pricing. The last thing you need to do is look at spot pricing of gold and silver. That will never give you a warning about anything ever. It has bupkis, zippo, zilcho to do with the physical gold trade, or how many people are buying gold or silver or sugar or wheat or oil. All of those things are mispriced. So throw out all of the
derivative market
prices, yes, that you see in this fugazi derivative market. Okay, now I'll answer your next question. You're talking about getting that next generation. So it's funny, most of my followers are my generation, Gen X, or baby boomers. And because traditionally gold and silver was money to the baby boomers, and the Gen X, I think, is just old enough to understand the impact of that. The younger generations are getting into it. Like, there was a report on Yahoo a few months ago that the millennials were buying more gold than any other generation. They're buying ETF form. They're buying GLD. And GLD obviously doesn't give you physical exposure unless you're an authorized participant. One of the big banks or traders, you can't get it. That's why the prospectus is written. But they thought, oh, I need to get into gold, and they're on their phones. This is the phone generation, like, oh, digital gold. But I think they've started to realize both in gold and silver, it doesn't give them real protection. It just gives them price exposure. But that market is never going to give you the real exposure of physical metal. And so what happened in 2008 was I got into gold, my generation. The Great Recession was our wake-up call. And my generation started getting into gold and silver. And it's funny, if you look at YouTube, all the bloggers, Twitter personalities, TikTokers, YouTubers, all came from that, the current ones that are popular, all came from that Great Recession, and it's mostly my generation. However, now that 15 years later, we're getting into the next big mess. Millennials can't find jobs in their field. 50% of them are underemployed or unemployed. They have a fraction of the wealth that the other generations have. In fact, per capita, the millennials are the absolute poorest generation to exist in the last 100 years. I want to say that again, per capita, per person. The millennials are the poorest generation in 100 years when we have the most capability economically we've had since humans have been on this rock we call Earth that circumnavigates the sun. They have no wealth, they've been screwed. And I think they're waking up and they're starting to say, I'm fed up with this. And I have more millennials getting involved in gold and silver and coming to coin shows and getting into gold or Bitcoin or something outside the system. They're looking for any alternative outside the system. And a lot of them are amenable to gold and silver. In fact, I would say between the two, silver's their favorite. It's very speculative. Silver's the one you get into if you think it's going to take a moonshot and go to, $600 an ounce. So they like that. They like the upside. It's kind of like the Bitcoin generation saying, what's physical Bitcoin? It's silver. So that's why if you're into Bitcoin, you're probably into silver before gold. And gold's sort of like for the quote-unquote old heads, is what those generations call us. But they're starting to get into it, and they're waking up. Now, the vehicles they're getting into aren't necessarily the best ones, so it's still an education piece to help them, see the path to actually protect themselves. But at least they've woken up, and you start to see this awakening. And I'm starting to get younger people talk to me at conferences. I'm starting to get younger people follow me. But it's a generational thing. If you look at, even the IMF has studied this. When the IMF studied central bank digital currencies, they said it's going to take us a generation to get people off of cash into central bank digital currencies. It's in that 2015 paper that's still on their website that I've talked about 1,000 times, on my social media. So it takes about 20 to 30 years to get people into a new mindset. So they're coming, but it takes time. I mean, honestly, it's going to take time. But I do think that within the next few years, we're going to have this major financial crisis. And I think that gold and silver are going to go up, and that's going to baptize a bunch of new people into the value of physical precious metals. And I think crisis does that. What is it? Necessity is the mother of all invention. Well, crisis is the mother of all mindset changes about economics.
I wonder, though, also, one of the things that scares me about that generation in particular is what happens when shit hits the fan, so to speak. Excuse my French. If we end up in a place where things are collapsing, the systems around us are falling apart, and we devolve into the way other empires have, we follow that same path, with conflict, etc. I think one of the scary things is that we've latched on to the ideologies that have proved to be the most dangerous coming out the other end. For instance, I think about Soviet Russia. I think about France. I think about a lot of those sort of, I'll hate to say socialist or communist ideas that are so attractive on the face of them right now in this euphoric moment, because we have lots of time to think about how to make the world a better place and how to share and be better people. So there's this sort of this altruistic attractiveness to some of those ideas, but when you see them put into practice, with the Bolsheviks and when you look at other kind of places in the world where this has come in and suddenly, farms are getting taken from people because you should be sharing that, and gold and other things, assets are being taken away from the rich and divided amongst or become the property of the state for the benefit of all. I mean, these are sorts of ideas that come in at the end of these empires, right? And it's awfully scary. Not always, but a lot of the time. And usually it's nested in ideas like this in that generation at the academic or institutional level. And I mean, it's hard to say that, you know, when I look at the ideologies, when I look at like the sort of drivel that is being put forward vis-a-vis what's important, what's not important, from academic institutions and from the public leaders that are kind of trying to rally support in that base, those ideas seem to be landing pretty good with that demographic. So does that not scare you at all that we could be heading into a world where the West turns to embrace ideas like socialism and communism and take us to dark places?
Sure. So could we go to neo-feudalism and the digital version of the Dark Ages? 100%. If you read Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, he's talking about many years into the future, hypothetical, 15,000 planets in this big federation. And he's talking about, well, long story short, it's a very complex series, but he's talking about the elites want to understand the future so that they can control it. And in that series, essentially, you have the protagonist and antagonist, the Empire versus the rebels, if you will. Same ideology in Star Trek and Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, what it comes down to is the bad guys win because they have control of information and control of money. And even though there is a rebellion, it's not strong enough to beat it. Will we get into another Dark Ages, or will people be strong enough to survive that and be able to reach their freedom? I don't know the answer to that question. The one thing that will save us is the internet and the ability to transact in ideas. Much like the printing press changed things and saved people from the Middle Ages and all of that type of dynastic family, tyrannical rule, that whole history. I'm thinking the internet has a chance to allow people, or to provide the path for people to find their own truth and not fall subject to some of those ideologies that don't work. And I'll use an example. When I was at college years and years and years ago, when I first went, I took a class on Chinese history. My ex-wife was Cambodian Chinese. I just wanted to understand Southeast Asia and sort of that a little bit better. So I took this class. It was taught by a gentleman that grew up, and he's probably long since passed away. He was old when we took the class, but he grew up during Mao Zedong, the Cultural Revolution. And he said they kept trying to institute communism and it failed. And they did it like 10 times and it failed every single time. And that's why Russia and China now have hybrid economies, because they realize you have to have some form of capitalism or else it doesn't work. In fact, even in Putin's interview with Tucker, he said, we're not really communism anymore, we're free market. I could make the argument that Russia right now is more free market than we are. I could easily make that argument. So free markets is what keeps stable societies. Communism does not. And what that professor told me, who lived in China, and he showed us a bunch of films of the communes, and he brought a bunch of information. And what was readily apparent was what happens in communism is, it sounds great, we're living in utopia, but guys at the top control everything, and they run it neo-feudalistically. And then people revolt, and then it breaks apart, and you go back to some free market. And then people have this ideology like, no, let's go back to communism. We want to share. We don't want the government. But people at the top, the sociopathic elements of society, take control of that. They try to control the people. It breaks apart. So those governmental systems never work in their purest form. Now, in a hybrid form, if you look at the UK, is it semi-capitalist, semi-socialist? Sure. If you look at the US, is it semi-capitalist, semi-socialist? Sure. Canada? Sure. Look at the more leaning towards leftist ideology in Peru and Mexico. When you talk about the mining stocks and stuff, and everybody worries, oh my God, Peru, Mexico, are they going to shut down the mines? But it never works long term. You can have hybrids of it, but the more socialism you bake into that cake, the more problems it has and the quicker it fails. Ultimately, free markets are the only way that any sort of political, cultural institution can survive over time.
I agree with that, and certainly there's like these little kind of sweet spots with it. You can get this sweet spot for a couple of decades, or maybe a little bit more, where you can have a handsome blend of a splash of socialism, and everybody's happy with it. And then all of a sudden, then the spending ratchets up, and the government gets bigger, and You know, it's a slippery slope. I read. Have you ever read the book, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn?
I haven't, but it's on my reading list, which, by the way, is like 100 books long.
It's so crazy. Like it's such a long read, and it's a hard read, but it's amazing. Like it's definitely worth a read. A friend recommended it to me, and after I read that, I was like, why isn't this a compulsory read?
Yeah.
For everyone, period, in school.
Well,
and it turns out in Russia it is.
Well, in lots of schools in the U.S., they're getting rid of the Grapes of Wrath. They're getting rid of Ernest Hemingway because they told the truth about what happened last time we went through this. And now they're banning the books because they're too difficult for our snowflake children to read and to absorb. And I'm like, give me a damn break. That's bullshit. They pulled in the educational system a lot of those stories out, which took what happened and put it into a narrative form people can understand. They can understand allegory. They can understand story. Story is, in fact, how we pass down our culture in the West. Think about movies, TV, music.
Totally.
Generationally, we tell stories about where our parents came from and our why do we do that? Why do we celebrate that at weddings and anniversaries?
Well, the Bible is stories.
Yes, exactly. It's how we pass down our culture. So now they're trying to change the culture to get rid of that because they don't want people to know, no, we're going to institute the system. We don't want any counter to that. So you can't get Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. You can't read that in school. You're not reading a lot of Shakespeare anymore. They got rid of all the Hemingway stuff. They got rid of all the stuff about people who are talking about those times, and they've replaced it with newer books that they want people to absorb. And that's why a lot of young people believe in that. They've been propagandized into one certain ideology and told that this is the way the world works. But the young people don't know. They've never tried to run a business. They've never tried to run a household. But the thing that's going the ultimate demise of that system is when reality smacks people in the face. Go back to Arthur Schopenhauer, which I quoted. At first, the truth, oh no, and then it comes out, and the truth is so in your face that they're like, oh yeah, I knew that all the time.
I just hope that the reality smacking them in the face isn't a French Revolution, where they're like, well, the rich people have, taken advantage of us for the last time. Let's take everything they've got and show them how to really work, And then all of a sudden, it's like it goes to a dark place really fast.
I'll be honest with you. I think in the United States, we're going to a dark place because we're the world reserve currency, the dominant nation state, and it's happened every time in history. It doesn't mean we're going to murder each other, but a dark place in the form of our society as we know is going to collapse. Now, how bad is that collapse? Are we able to live off of soup kitchens like we did during the Great Depression? Or is it going to be more like the books I'm reading around, it's all roaming gangs, But look at what happened to Serbia. When that war started, it was the gangs. And look at what happened to Argentina, it was the gangs. And I've interviewed and read books and stuff from people who lived during that age. One of the people, Fernando Aguirre, it goes by Furfall, who lived during the Argentinian peso crisis in 2000, 2001, which, by the way, coincided with what? Our tech crisis. It's funny how that works. Funny how recessions don't just occur in one place. And it's funny how the United States may have, I don't know, exported dollar inflation to Argentina, crashed its peso, and then we had our own recession following. It's funny how that kind of all, cycles around, in the system. But, he lived during that crisis, and he said there were warlords running around, and I feared for my life. And eventually he moved to Europe. He now lives in Spain because he's like, Argentina's not safe. Well, what's Argentina going through again the last few years? I don't know, same thing, right?
I quite like Spain as an example.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to go. I have hope that if we can educate enough people, it won't go to warlord territory. But man, it's happened before. I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility. I mean, I don't want to go around scaring people, but I mean, Jesus, look at history. You have to look at history. The main thing, if you look at Neil House research and you look at that fourth turning, and you look at sort of that type of research, generational research, what you find is that by the time you get to the fourth generation, all those stories have been lost. The government has replaced our culture with this educational system which brainwashes people, and people don't remember the Great Depression. The only reason I remember the Great Depression, my parents grew up during it, so I can't forget it. I'm not ever going to be allowed to. The other day I was going through the old war letters my father was writing back and forth to his family when he was marching from France to Germany. Even though he was a sailor, they put him on boots on the ground because he was a medic and a radio operator, and they said, sailor no more. You're coming with us, pal. And so he got to see it all, man. and I'm reading some of his letters, and he can't talk about troop movements, but you can tell the tone of things. Man, it got very dark. Even in the U.S., where we weren't on the battlefield, it got very dark. I think that's entirely possible across all of North America, Canada, and Mexico, because we're so intertwined. We could go through very, very hard times where people are starving. It would not surprise me. I don't want that to happen, but it's entirely possible for it to happen.
Yeah, I guess a bit of optimism there too is that you brought up Spain, and that's a really good example. My wife's Spanish. So I've been learning a lot about that history and Franco and the Civil War, and they had a mass migration issue too in the early 2000s, and sort of that bubble has blown and burst a couple of times in this last century, right? So they've had to pick things up off the bottom a couple of times, and one of the interesting things there is there's a whole lot of domestic commerce. There's a whole lot of, it's really cool. You go to a hardware store and there's hammers that are made in Spain, sold right next to a hammer that's made in America or made in China. And it says, this one's a little bit more money, but it's Spanish, and people buy that. People support that. And it doesn't matter. It's like, it's toasters, everything. And so that's something that's kind of emerged out of that economy's, ebb and flow, I guess, in some way. But I think it's hopeful because obviously things didn't collapse and degrade to a point of, all out catastrophe. I think that, it's probably better off today than it ever was. So I think some good things can come out of it, but, again, hopefully it's not a bad outcome for us.
The history books will be written about what happens. I would say this: what's going to happen is going to happen. Life happens whether there's natural law. The only thing that really changes how bad it is how people react and how will they educate themselves and how will they participate in that discourse. If you're participating in this type of discourse and have been for a while, you're not going to have it as bad. But if society itself participates in this discourse, we can change our own future because we can go through a couple of years of really bad pain and rebuild, or we can, by not paying attention and not being active and not taking part, have this last for 10 to 15 to 20 years. There's two choices. And ultimately, the choice is ours. There's an old Eagle song that said, something to the effect of, a lot of people live their life in chains, not realizing they didn't have the key. You got the key right here. Unlock your chains. That's education. And it's discourse, not just knowing, it's then discoursing.
Yeah, we have to have these conversations out loud.
Yes, the conversation's out loud so it flows. That's culture. And that is the basis of society. If we get back to the basis of sound society, we can mitigate that. We can go back to manufacturing, like you said, with your own hammers. We can go back to a national pride. We can go back to fixing our systems, and further, all the stuff that we're worried about and wringing our hands about now with immigration and the dollar will go away, because if we go through a collapse scenario, people are going to leave and people aren't going to use the dollar. So in other words, what's going to happen is going to happen. Stop worrying so much about it. Learn about it. Learn what you can do and be prepared, and then the pain goes way down. We have the key. The key is simply waking up and discussing it and saying, okay, I'm going to go get a little gold and silver, and when I save money for my kids, I'll give them a little gold and silver, or maybe some Bitcoin, wherever you want to do, and let's buy local instead of going to Walmart, and let's stop buying Chinese stuff and go to our craftsmen. That's all you have to do. That's it. And we can mitigate your own problems. And that's all we've ever had to do. We just have to get out of that hive mindset of the TV tells me what to do and I must do what the TV tells me to. Turn off the damn television. Go have a conversation with your neighbor. Go down the street to your neighbor and take them a quiche and go have dinner. Go grab another parent at school and grab their kids and say, let's go have coffee and let the kids go play at McDonald's. I don't care how you do it. I don't give a damn. It's you. You're the solution. You and me and everyone else. We were always the solution. This is God's world, not ours. And if we accept that, we are the solution. So to answer your question, it depends on us. And that's why I don't know how to answer it, because if you look at history, there's a couple of different cases. I gave you the really bad one, and I give you a sort of a mediocre one. We could have a really positive one if people just it pulled an Ayn Rand and said, I'm out of this system. Forget this noise. Forget this place. That's up to us. That's the good news. It's not them. It's not the politics. Everybody wrings their hands over what Biden's doing or whether Le Pen is going to win versus Macron. Who gives a shit?
Yeah. They're not determining your future. They're not determining your.
No, if you allow them to, they will. If you take their power away, which is simply disengaging and going down the road and talking to the people that matter in your life, that's the answer to the solution. Has always been the answer to the solution, and it's in every religious text, it's in every culture, and we just forget. We need to remember.
Yeah. We drift away from community and we expand our borders and we expand our community. But then at some point we have to contract and refocus. Yeah.
But have good relations with your neighbors. So trade with your neighbors. Go visit your neighbors. If you're living in Europe and you have not, if you're in Spain and you haven't gone to Rome or to Germany, shame on you. Get on the damn train. It's not that expensive. Go see your neighbors because that fosters good relationships. You know, fences make good neighbors, yes. But also what makes good neighbors is, I don't know, have a block party, go to their house and offer them food. You know, share your culture, share yourself with them. That's the answer. It's always been the answer. Always will be the answer. It's just we forget. You know, we forget. But getting local, a good friend of mine runs Crowvan Communities. What he's setting up, and he's in the UK, and what he's setting up is this payment system in silver, where you can get on a website, you can go to your local coin dealer, deposit silver, and then you can use that silver to pay for services, local dentists, plumbers, whatever. Beautiful system, barter system. He's not trying to recreate money. He's just trying to recreate barter, and he often says the solution's always local. Go local and stop worrying about this over here. And as soon as you do that, it's wondrous how commerce can then build so much abundance. If, for example, I just went to a coin show, and we're all at the coin show, and we all have our separate tables. But right next to me is a guy that watches me on YouTube, and he's a big fan. I said, hey, let's work together. We were passing each other customers where he had a product they wanted, I had a product. You know, we were helping each other transact in business, and our overall take was better because we helped each other. Well, he's my competitor sitting right next to me. But as soon as we started partnering, we had better. And I went to a bunch of people at the coin show and said, give me your card, give me your card, give me your card. If you have a product I need, ship it over to me. I'll give you, you know, this is how commerce works. That's what we got to do. We got to go back to that. That's the answer. It's always been the answer. It will always be the answer.
Awesome. Well, I hope good success with the channel. I hope that we have a soft landing, so to speak, not in the way it's used right now, but in the bigger picture. And I really do hope we can get back to a municipal kind of driven, more local, smaller, you know, trade-based system. And yeah, I think it's really it's going to be interesting times ahead. And for those of us that have good gold and silver exposure, let's hope that we're right.
We hope so. And if you don't have money for gold and silver, just go educate yourself and, you know, buy some food and do what you got to do. You don't have to have gold and silver. You can just be self-sufficient and you're going to be fine. Go grow a victory garden. Make friends who have something that you need. Instead of going to the dealership to fix your car, go find that mechanic who's your friend who you can barter with to fix your car. Those types of things can get you through really tough times. This is what my parents did during the Great Depression. You saved everything. You did business with your neighbors. You shared. You supported each other. That's what gets people through tough times. That's all we got to do.
Well, and you hone yourself into being something that you can offer to society.
Yes.
To your society.
Take your skill and offer it to society.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Rob, awesome. Great to have you on. Look forward to seeing you at PDAC coming up here, and let's do it again.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Awesome chat. Okay. Take care.